The moment my sister told me to pack my things and get out of my own house, I knew something wasn't right. But what I didn't know was that less than 10 minutes later, a knock on the door would change everything. "You heard me, Caleb," she said coldly. "This house isn't yours anymore." My name is Caleb Mercer, and until that moment, I thought I understood exactly how far my sister was willing to go. I was wrong, because as I stood there in the living room, the same one I had grown up in, I realized something terrifying.
You wasn't bluffing.
Across from me, my older sister Vanessa Mercer stood with her arms crossed, her expression calm, almost satisfied. Beside her stood a man in a gray suit holding a folder under his arm. "A lawyer? This is ridiculous," I said, trying to stay calm. "You can't just walk in here and tell me to leave." Vanessa didn't even blink. "I'm not telling you," she replied. "I'm informing you." The lawyer stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Mercer," he said in a polite but firm tone, "we have documentation that transfers ownership of this property to Ms. Vanessa Mercer." I stared at him. "What?" Vanessa tilted her head slightly, watching my reaction like she had been waiting for it. "Dad left the house to me," she said. "That's a lie." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Is it?" The lawyer opened the folder and pulled out a set of papers. "Signed and notarized," he said. "Your father transferred full ownership 6 months before his passing." My chest tightened. "It's not possible," I said. "I was there when he wrote his will." Vanessa laughed softly. "You're there for the version he showed you." The words hit harder than anything else she had said. "You're lying," I repeated. But even as I said it, something didn't feel right. "No," she said calmly. "You just didn't know everything." The lawyer stepped forward again. "Mr. Mercer, we're trying to handle this peacefully. If you leave voluntarily, this process will be much easier for everyone involved." I looked around the house. The framed photos, the old wooden staircase, the living room where my father used to sit every evening. Everything in this place had memories attached to it. Memories Vanessa clearly didn't care about. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. Vanessa's expression hardened slightly. "Then you're making this harder than it needs to be." "For who?" I asked. "For you," she nodded toward the lawyer. "Elliot." The lawyer hesitated for a second, then pulled out another document. "Eviction notice," he said. My stomach dropped. "You're actually doing this?" Vanessa didn't answer. She didn't need to. The paper in his hand said everything. I took a step forward. "This isn't over," I said. Vanessa met my eyes. "It already is." Then she turned toward the door. "Give him until tonight," she told the lawyer. "If he's still here, we call the sheriff." The word hit me instantly. Sheriff. This wasn't just a threat anymore. This was real. Vanessa walked toward the door without looking back. The lawyer followed her, pausing only long enough to place the eviction notice on the table in front of me. "Think carefully," he said quietly. Then they left. The door closed behind them. And just like that, I was alone. I stood there for a long moment staring at the paper. Eviction notice. My name on it. My address. My house. Or at least, the house Vanessa now claimed was hers. Something felt off. Not just wrong, but planned, to clean, to perfect. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. There was only one person I could call. The man who had been with my father longer than anyone else. His old attorney. The phone rang once, twice. Then he picked up Mr. Hayes. I said. There was a pause on the other end. "Yes, it's Caleb Mercer." Another pause. Then his voice changed slightly. "Caleb, I need to ask you something," I said. "What is it?" I glanced back at the eviction notice. Did my father ever change his will? The line went quiet, too quiet. Then he said something that made my grip tighten around the phone. "Who told you that?" And before I could answer, a loud knock echoed through the front door. 3 sharp knocks. Heavy. Official. I froze, because I already knew who it was. And this time, it wasn't my sister. It was the sheriff. The knock came again, louder this time, more deliberate. For a second, I just stood there staring at the door, my phone still pressed to my ear. On the other end of the line, Mr. Hayes hadn't said anything yet, but I could hear his breathing. "Caleb," he said finally, "there's someone at the door." I whispered another knock. Bang, 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 not the kind of knock you ignore. "Mr. Hayes." Voice dropped slightly. "Don't open it yet." My My chest tightened. Why? He hesitated. Just tell me exactly what's going on. I glanced at the eviction notice on the table. Vanessa showed up with a lawyer, I said quickly. She says Dad transferred the house to her before he died. He gave me an eviction notice. Silence then. That's not possible. Those 4 words hit harder than anything Vanessa had said. What do you mean? I asked Mr. Hayes. The voice was firm now. Your father never signed any transfer like that. My grip on the phone tightened. Are you sure? I handled every legal document your father ever signed, he said. If there had been a transfer, I would know. Another knock, even harder this time. Sheriff's office. A voice called from outside. Open the door. My heart started pounding. Mr. Hayes spoke quickly. Caleb, listen to me carefully. I'm listening. Do not let anyone remove you from that house until we verify those documents. They have papers, I said. They look real. That doesn't matter, he replied. Forgery exists. The word hit me like a shock. Forgery. Caleb, he said something? About this doesn't add up. The sheriff knocked again. Sir, we need you to open the door. Mr. Hayes lowered his voice. Put me on speaker and answer the door. I took a slow breath. Then I pressed the speaker button. Stay on the line, I said. I'm not going anywhere, he replied. I walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier. Then the last, when I reached it. I paused for a second. Then I opened it. Standing on the porch was a uniformed officer, mid-40s. Serious expression, badge reflecting the sunlight. Sheriff Daniel Ross. Behind him stood another deputy. Arms folded, watching everything carefully. Mr. Caleb Mercer? The sheriff asked. Yes, he nodded once. We received a request to enforce an eviction notice at this property. My stomach tightened. I know. The sheriff studied me for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. May I see the paperwork? I blinked. What? The eviction notice, he repeated calmly. I stepped aside. It's inside. He nodded and walked in. The deputy followed. Mr. Hayes' voice came faintly from my phone on the table. Put him on speaker, said quietly. I picked up the phone and placed it on the table. Sheriff Ross walked over and picked up the eviction. Notice he read it slowly, carefully. Then he flipped the page and read it again. The room went completely silent. I watched his face closely, waiting, trying to understand what he was seeing. Finally, he lowered the paper slightly. Then he looked at me. Who gave you this? My sister, I said. Vanessa Mercer and her lawyer. What? The sheriff nodded slowly. Then he did something I didn't expect. He sighed and shook his head. What? I asked. The sheriff placed the paper back on the table. This document has a problem. My heart skipped. What kind of problem? He glanced down at it again. Then he said something that made everything stop. This eviction notice isn't valid. I stared at him. What? Behind me, Mr. Hayes' voice came through the phone. I thought so. The sheriff looked at the phone. Who's that? His father's attorney, I said. Sheriff Ross nodded. That explains it. Frowned. Explains what? The sheriff tapped the paper lightly. This document is missing a required court authorization stamp. My chest tightened. So, what does that mean? The sheriff looked directly at me. It means no one has the legal right to remove you from this house. For a second I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even blink. Because everything Vanessa had said, everything her lawyer had claimed, was starting to fall apart. The sheriff folded the paper neatly. Then he added one more sentence. And that's not the only issue. My stomach dropped again. What else? The sheriff's expression hardened slightly. The signature on this document? He paused. Doesn't match the official court records. Silence filled the room. Then Mr. Hayes' voice came through the phone again. Sheriff, I think you should check the property deed. Sheriff Ross turned toward the phone. I was just about to. He looked at me. Double quotes, Mr. Mercer. Oh, do you have a copy of the original deed? I nodded slowly. Yeah, bring it. I walked to the drawer where my father used to keep important documents. My hands felt slightly unsteady as I pulled it open. The folder was still there, exactly where he had left it. I took it out and handed it to the sheriff. He opened it, read the first page, then the second. Then he stopped, and his expression changed, not confused, not surprised, something else, something serious. He looked up at me, then toward the phone, then back at the document, and finally, he said something that made my heart stop. Your sister has no claim to this house. The room went completely still. For a moment I thought I had heard the sheriff wrong. What? I said. Sheriff Daniel Ross held the deed up slightly, his eyes still scanning the page like he was double-checking something important. I said, he repeated calmly, your sister has no legal claim to this property. The faint sound of Mr. Hayes exhaling came through the phone. I knew it, he muttered. My chest tightened. But she had documents, I said, signed, notarized. The sheriff nodded. I saw them, and he looked directly at me. They don't match this. He tapped the original deed in his hand. This document is registered with the county, he explained. Clearly lists you as the sole beneficiary of the property. My head started spinning. Me, yes. I took a step back, trying to process what he was saying. That doesn't make sense, I said. My father never told me that. Mr. Hayes spoke through the phone. He didn't tell anyone. I turned toward the table. What do you mean? The sheriff glanced at the phone. You want to explain? He asked. Mr. Hayes sighed softly. Caleb, your father made some changes before he passed. My grip tightened around the edge of the table. What changes? He updated the deed and placed the house entirely under your name. My voice dropped. Why wouldn't he tell me? There was a pause. Then Mr. Hayes answered quietly, because he didn't trust Vanessa.
Ow.
The words hit harder than anything. Else the sheriff nodded slightly. That lines up. I looked at him with what? He held up the eviction notice again. With this, I frowned. What about it? The sheriff's expression grew more serious. This wasn't just a mistake. The stomach tightened. What are you saying? He placed both documents side by side on the table. The signatures don't match, he said. The formatting is off. And the court seal, he paused, is a fake. Silence. Complete silence. I stared at the paper like it had suddenly turned into something dangerous, you're saying? I started slowly. Yes, the sheriff said. This eviction notice was forged. My chest tightened again, and the ownership transfer she showed me. The sheriff didn't hesitate. Most likely forged too. Mr. Hayes' voice came through the phone again. That's a serious offense. The sheriff nodded. Very serious. I felt a strange mix of anger and disbelief rising inside me. She tried to throw me out of my own house, using fake documents. The sheriff looked at me carefully. That's exactly what it looks like. I ran a hand through my hair. This doesn't make any sense. Mr. Hayes spoke again. It makes perfect sense. I looked at the phone. How? She thought you didn't know, he said. About the deed. About the ownership. The realization hit me slowly. Vanessa hadn't just been confident earlier. She had been certain that. I had no idea what my father had done. The sheriff folded his arms, which means she believed she could take the house without resistance. My voice dropped. She planned this, yes, the sheriff said, and she almost got away with it. A heavy silence settled over the room. Then the sheriff straightened slightly. I'm going to need to ask you a few more questions. Okay. When did she give you these documents? About 30 minutes ago? And where is she now? Hesitated. She left with her lawyer. The sheriff nodded. I see. He reached for his radio, then paused and looked at me again. Mr. Mercer, there's something else you should understand. What? He held up the forged eviction notice. This isn't just a civil dispute anymore. Again, what do you mean? The sheriff's voice was firm. Presenting forged legal documents? He paused. Is a criminal offense, Mr. Hayes added quietly. Felony level. Yeah, the word echoed in my head. Felony. I looked down at the paper again, then back at the sheriff. So what happens now? The sheriff picked up his radio, now his. Expression was completely serious. Now, he pressed the button. We find your sister. Before I could say anything else, the front door opened, and a familiar voice echoed from the hallway. "You won't have to look very far." I froze, because standing in the doorway was Vanessa. And this time, she wasn't smiling. The moment Vanessa Mercer stepped back into the house, the entire room shifted. This time, she wasn't calm, she wasn't smiling, and she definitely wasn't in control. Behind her, the same lawyer stood, except now the confidence he carried earlier had completely disappeared. His grip on the folder in his hand was tighter, his eyes scanning the room like he was trying to understand what had already gone wrong. Vanessa's eyes locked onto the sheriff. "What's going on?" she asked sharply. Sheriff Daniel Ross didn't move. "I was about to ask you the same thing." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "I already handled this," she said, gesturing toward me. "He's been served. He needs to leave." The sheriff didn't respond right away. Instead, he picked up the eviction notice from the table and held it up. "This?" he asked. Vanessa nodded confidently. "Yes." The sheriff tilted his head slightly. "Where did you get it?" Vanessa didn't hesitate. "From my attorney." She gestured toward the man beside her. All eyes turned to him. The lawyer swallowed slightly. "It was processed through the proper channels," he said quickly. The sheriff stepped closer. "Really?" The lawyer nodded. "Yes," the sheriff handed him the paper. "Then you might want to explain something." The lawyer took the document, looked at it, and froze, because now he was seeing it the same way the sheriff had. "The court's seal is wrong," the sheriff said calmly. "The formatting doesn't match official filings. The authorization stamp." He paused. "Doesn't exist." Vanessa frowned. "What are you talking about?" The lawyer's voice dropped. "This isn't the version I filed." The room went silent. Vanessa turned toward him slowly. "What?" He flipped the page over, scanning it again. "This isn't the same document." Vanessa's expression changed. "Stop playing games," she snapped. "You gave me that," he said quickly. "I didn't." The tension in the room spiked instantly. Sheriff Ross stepped forward. "So we have a forged eviction notice."
Ow!
He glanced between them, and neither of you is taking responsibility. Vanessa's voice rose. "I didn't forge anything." Sheriff looked at her carefully. "Then how did it end up in your hands?" Vanessa hesitated. For the first time since she walked in, she didn't have an immediate answer. I watched her closely. This wasn't the same confident sister who had stood here earlier. It's telling me I had nothing. Now, she looked unsure. The sheriff turned to the lawyer again. "Did you prepare any eviction notice for this property?" The lawyer shook his head immediately. "No, not yet. We were still reviewing the ownership documents." Vanessa's head snapped toward him. "What are you talking about?" "You told me to draft something," he said nervously. "But I never finalized it." Vanessa stared at him. "That's not what you said earlier." The lawyer's voice tightened. "I said we could proceed if the documents checked out." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "And did they?" The lawyer hesitated. "I hadn't verified them yet." Silence. Vanessa slowly turned back toward the sheriff. "Okay, so maybe the paperwork isn't perfect." "Not perfect?" Sheriff repeated. He held up the document again. "This is fake." The word echoed in the room. Vanessa's expression hardened. "You're blowing this out of proportion." The sheriff didn't blink. "Am I?" "Oh, yeah?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. "Let's go over this again," he said. "You presented a forged eviction notice claiming ownership of a property that, according to official records, belongs to your brother." Vanessa crossed her arms. "I have documents too." Sheriff nodded. "I'd like to see them." Vanessa hesitated, just for a second. Then she handed over a folded set of papers. The sheriff opened them, read the first page, then the second. Then he stopped. His expression changed again. But this time, it wasn't confusion. It was recognition. He looked up slowly. "Where did you get these?" Vanessa lifted her chin. "They're legal." Sheriff didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned the paper slightly so I could see them too. And the moment I looked at the signature at the bottom, my chest tightened because I recognized it instantly. My father's signature, but something about it felt off. Not completely wrong, but not completely right either. Mr. Hayes' voice came through the phone. Sheriff, check the date. The sheriff looked back down, his eyes narrowed. Then he said something that made everything worse. This document was signed 2 days after your father died. The room went completely silent. Vanessa's face went pale. The sheriff looked directly at her. Do you want to explain that? And for the first time since this all started, Vanessa had no answer. Asterisk for a moment. No one in the room spoke. The air felt thick, like everything was about to collapse at once. Vanessa Mercer stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her eyes locked on the document still in the sheriff's hand. The confidence she carried earlier was gone. This doesn't mean anything, she said quickly. Sheriff Daniel Ross didn't respond right away. He looked down at the paper again then. Back at her. Your father passed away on March 14th, he said calmly. Vanessa swallowed. Yes, said Sheriff. Tapped the document. This signature is dated March 16th. Silence. My chest tightened. I could hear my own heartbeat. That's impossible, I said quietly. Mr. Hayes' voice came through the phone again. It's more than impossible. The sheriff nodded. It's illegal. Vanessa shook her head. No. There has to be some mistake. But her voice didn't sound convincing anymore. Her lawyer stepped forward slowly. Vanessa, where did you get this document? She didn't. Answer, Vanessa, he repeated. More firmly this time, she finally looked at him. I found it in Dad's office. The lawyer frowned after he passed. Yes, and you didn't question the date? Vanessa hesitated. I assumed it was written earlier. The sheriff didn't look convinced. Documents like this don't accidentally get dated after someone dies. Breathing became uneven. I didn't forge anything, she said. The sheriff's tone remained calm. Then someone did. A heavy silence settled over the room again. I stared at my sister, the same person who had stood here earlier, telling me I was worth nothing. Now looked like she didn't even believe her own words. Mr. Hayes spoke again through the phone. Sheriff, there's something else. The sheriff turned toward the phone. What? That signature, Hayes said. Compare it to the original deed. The sheriff immediately placed both documents side by side. He studied them carefully. Then his expression hardened. They're similar, he said. Vanessa looked up quickly. See? But the sheriff continued. But not identical. My stomach dropped again. What do you mean? I asked. The sheriff pointed at the signature. Same style, same structure. He paused, but the pressure marks are different. Stroke patterns don't match. Vanessa shook her head. That doesn't prove anything. Mr. Hayes replied calmly. It proves someone tried to copy it. The word echoed in my head. Copy, forgery. The sheriff looked directly at Vanessa. Do you have access to your father's old documents? Vanessa hesitated again. Yes. And did you ever make copies of his signature? No, she said. Quickly, too quickly, the sheriff noticed. So that's a no? Vanessa's voice dropped. I mean, I might have seen it before. The tension in the room spiked. Her lawyer stepped back slightly. Vanessa, you need to be very careful. Right now. But the sheriff was already reaching for his radio again. Dispatch, he said. Vanessa's eyes widened. Wait, what are you doing? The sheriff didn't look at her. I'm going to need a unit on standby. My chest tightened. This is getting out of control, Vanessa said, her voice rising. No. The sheriff replied calmly. It's getting clear. The room went silent again. Then the sheriff said something that made everything worse. There's enough here to open a criminal investigation. Vanessa froze. What? He looked directly at her. Forgery of legal documents. Attempted unlawful eviction. Possible fraud. Each word hit harder than the last. Vanessa shook her head slowly. No, this isn't happening. Her lawyer stepped forward. Sheriff. My client. But the sheriff raised his hand. Your client can explain everything. He paused. At the station. The words echoed in the room. Vanessa's breathing became shallow. You're arresting me? The sheriff didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the documents. one last time, then back at her, and just as he was about to speak, the phone on the table suddenly buzzed. All of us looked at it. A new message from an unknown number. Mr. Hayes. Voice came through immediately. Caleb read that. My hands felt unsteady as I picked up the phone. I opened the message, and the moment I read it, everything changed, because the message said only one thing: she didn't do this alone. Asterisk. For a moment, I just stared at the message on my phone. She didn't do this alone. My grip tightened. What is it? Sheriff Daniel Ross asked. Looked up slowly. Someone just sent me this. I turned the screen toward him. He read the message. Then his expression changed. Where did this come from? Unknown number, I said. Behind him, Vanessa's voice shook slightly. What are you talking about? No one answered her. Mr. Hayes spoke through the phone. Caleb, is there anything else? I looked back at the message. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen at first. There was a second line, smaller, almost like it had been. Added afterward, my heart skipped. There's more. What? Hayes asked. I read it out loud. Check the lawyer. The room went silent, slowly. Every head turned toward the same person, Vanessa's lawyer. He froze. What? He said quickly. That's ridiculous. Ross stepped forward slightly. Sir, I'm going to need you to stay right where you are. The lawyer raised his hands defensively. This is insane. You're taking an anonymous message seriously? Sheriff didn't argue. Instead, he reached out. Your phone? The lawyer hesitated. Excuse me? Your phone, the sheriff repeated. The tension in the room spiked instantly. Vanessa looked confused. What is going on? The lawyer forced a laugh. You can refuse, the sheriff said calmly. But I'll take that as probable cause to escalate. The lawyer's smile disappeared. For a moment, no one moved. Then slowly, he reached into his pocket and handed over his phone. Sheriff. Ross took it, unlocked it, and started scrolling. The room was completely silent. Every second felt longer than the last. Then the sheriff stopped. His eyes narrowed. That's interesting. Chest tightened. What? He turned the screen slightly. So is this. I stepped closer, and what I saw made my stomach drop. A message thread. Recent, very recent, between the lawyer and Vanessa, but it wasn't just normal messages. It was instructions. Detailed ones. Use the second document. He won't check the date. We just need him out of the house. Vanessa's face went pale. That's not, but the sheriff cut her off. There's more. He scrolled further, and then he stopped again. This time, his expression turned serious. What? I asked again. The sheriff looked directly at the lawyer. Who is this? The lawyer didn't answer. Sheriff Ross turned the screen toward us. A third name in the conversation, saved under initials, Mr. Mr. Hayes spoke immediately. Caleb, think my mind raced. Mr. Miar. Then it hit me. Mark Reynolds. Vanessa's eyes widened. The lawyer froze. I looked at the sheriff. He used to work for my dad. The sheriff nodded slowly, and he handled property records. I said. The room went completely silent. Mr. Hayes' voice came through again. That explains everything. The sheriff looked at me. How? I took a breath. If someone wanted to fake ownership documents, they'd need access to official records. The sheriff turned back to the phone. And your friend Mark Reynolds had that access? Yes. Vanessa shook her head. No, this isn't real. But her voice was already breaking. The sheriff stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around. Vanessa backed up slightly. No. The sheriff's voice hardened. Turn around. The lawyer tried to step in. Sheriff, we need to stay out of this. Ross snapped. The lawyer froze. Vanessa looked at me for a second. She looked like she was about to say something, but then she turned. Slowly, the sheriff placed the cuffs around her wrists. The sound echoed through the room. My chest tightened. Because no matter what she had done, she was still my sister. But this wasn't over, not even close. Because as the sheriff secured the cuffs, he looked at the phone one last time, then at me, and said something that made everything worse. We still need to find Mark Reynolds. Asterisk, the sound of the handcuffs clicking around Vanessa's wrists echoed longer than it should have. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the lawyer stood completely still now, like he finally understood how bad this had become. Sheriff Daniel Ross guided Vanessa toward the couch. Sit. She didn't resist this time. Slowly. She sat down. Her eyes dropped to the floor. The same person who had walked into this house earlier with confidence now looked like everything had collapsed around her. I stood there, not knowing what to feel. Anger, shock, or something else entirely. Mr. Hayes' voice came through the phone again. Caleb, stay focused. I nodded slightly. Yeah. The sheriff turned toward me. This Mark Reynolds, he said. How well did you know him? I exhaled slowly. Not that well, I said. He worked with my dad for years. Handled property records, legal filings, stuff like that. The sheriff nodded. So he had access to signatures, documents, official templates. Yes, behind us, the lawyer finally spoke again. This doesn't prove he did anything. Sheriff Ross turned toward him. It proves he had the ability. The lawyer swallowed. That's not the same thing. No, the sheriff agreed. But it's a start. Vanessa suddenly spoke. I didn't know it was fake. Her voice was quiet, almost desperate. The sheriff looked at her. You expect me to believe that? She nodded quickly. He told me everything was legal. The sheriff asked. Vanessa hesitated, then she said it, Mark. The room went silent again. The sheriff's expression hardened. What exactly did he tell you? Vanessa swallowed. He said Dad had updated the ownership records, and that Caleb just didn't know about it. I felt something twist in my chest. That part wasn't even a complete lie. My father had changed the records, just not in her. Favored, Vanessa continued. He said all we needed was the right paperwork, and it would be done. The sheriff crossed his arms. And you believed him? She looked down. I wanted to. The honesty in that sentence hit harder than anything else. The sheriff glanced at me, briefly, then back at her, and the eviction. Notice, Vanessa shook her head. That wasn't supposed to happen like that. What do you mean? I asked. She looked at me for the first time since being handcuffed. I told him I just wanted proof. Not to throw you out like that. My voice dropped, but you still came here and did it. She didn't answer. Because there was no answer. The sheriff turned back toward me. Do you know where this Mark Reynolds is now? I shook my head no. But before the sheriff could respond, the phone buzzed again. All of us looked at it instantly. Another message. Same unknown. My heart started pounding. Caleb, Mr. Hayes said quietly. I see it. I picked up the phone, opened the message, and this time wasn't just text. It was a location, a live one, pinned on a map, and below it one line. He's trying to leave. The sheriff stepped closer. Show me. I turned the screen toward him. He studied it for a second, then immediately reached for his radio. Dispatch. I need units at this location. Possible suspect attempting to flee. Vanessa's eyes widened. He's running. The sheriff didn't. Look at her. He knows we're onto him. The lawyer stepped back slowly, clearly trying to distance himself from everything. This is insane, he muttered, but no one was listening to him anymore. The sheriff turned back to me, Mr. Mercer. I'm going to need you to come with us. I blinked. What? You're the property owner? He said. And this involves your family and your father's records. My chest tightened. You want me to go with you? He nodded, double quotes. Yes. Double quotes. Mr. Hayes spoke through the phone. Go. I looked at him. You sure? The sheriff gestured toward the door. Let's move. I took one last look at Vanessa. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, quiet, defeated. Then I followed the sheriff outside, because somewhere out there, the man who started all of this was trying to run, and this time we're going to catch him. Asterisk. The sirens cut through the afternoon air as the patrol car sped down the highway. I sat in the passenger seat beside Sheriff Daniel Ross. watching the location pin move slightly on his dashboard screen. "He's heading north," the sheriff said, eyes fixed on the road, trying to get out of county. My heart was still racing. This guy really thinks he can just disappear, I asked. The sheriff didn't answer right away. "People like him always do," he said finally. "Until they realize they can't." The radio crackled. "Unit 3, suspect vehicle spotted near Route 18, attempting to merge onto the interstate." The sheriff grabbed the radio. "Stay on him, we're 2 minutes out." My grip tightened against the seat. Everything that had happened in the last hour felt unreal. My sister trying to take my house, forged documents, a hidden accomplice, and now a chase. The sheriff pressed harder on the accelerator. Up ahead, I could already see flashing lights, 2 patrol cars, blocking part of the road, and a dark sedan trapped between them. "That's him," the sheriff said. We pulled up just as the officers stepped out with their weapons drawn. "Driver, turn off the engine." The man inside the car hesitated, then dashed the door opened, and he stepped out slowly, hands raised. Mark Reynolds. Even from a distance I recognized him. Same calm face, same quiet presence he always had around my father's office. But now, there was something different. Fear. The officers moved in quickly, securing him. Mark Reynolds. One of them said, "You are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy." He didn't resist, didn't argue. He just stood there, silent. The sheriff stepped out of the car. "Stay here," he told me. But I was already watching. Mark's eyes shifted slightly, and for a brief moment, they landed on me. There was no anger. There no panic, just something else. Regret. The sheriff approached him. "You want to explain yourself?" Ross asked. Mark let out a slow breath. It was supposed to be simple. The sheriff crossed his arms. Simple how? Mark glanced toward me again. She didn't know. "Vanessa," the words hit me instantly. The sheriff didn't seem surprised. "She didn't know you were forging documents." Mark shook his head. "No." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Then what did she know?" Mark hesitated. Then he said something that changed everything one last time. "She thought the house was hers." I felt my chest tighten. "What?" Mark looked directly at me now. "Your father told her that, before he died." Silence. Complete silence. The sheriff frowned. "That doesn't match the official records." Mark nodded. "I know. Then why would he tell her that?" Mark swallowed, because he changed his mind. The words echoed in my head. Changed his mind. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Mark took a breath. "Your father planned to split everything between both of you." My stomach dropped. But then, something happened. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "What?" Mark looked down briefly. "Vanessa pushed him to rewrite everything in her favor." My chest tightened again. "And he did?" Mark shook his head. "No." Looked back up at me. He changed it the other way. Now everything made sense. My father hadn't trusted her. That's why he left the house to me. The sheriff stepped closer. "So you decided to fix that?" Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. "You forged the documents," the sheriff said. Double quotes, "Yes." "You coached Vanessa." "Yes." "You planned to take the property." Mark hesitated. "Yes." The officers tightened the cuffs. The sheriff nodded. "Take him." As they led Mark toward the patrol car, I just stood there, trying to process everything. The betrayal, the lies, the truth. Minutes later, we drove back to the house. The sun was starting to set, and everything felt quieter. Vanessa was gone. Taken in for questioning, the house felt empty now, but different. Not broken. Just still. I stepped inside slowly, looked around the living room again. Same walls, same memories. But now, the truth was clear. This house had never been about ownership or money or no. It was about trust, and the moment that trust was broken, everything else followed. The sheriff stood near the door. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah." Gave a small nod. "You did the right thing." I wasn't sure about that. But I knew one thing. Sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the most. But in the end, truth always shows up, even if it has to knock on the door.